This is Beyond with Heather Tesch, where we examine near-death experiences and life itself, hopefully making this life a little better. Hello, everyone. My guest today is Susanne Seymoure. Susanne, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Heather.
Wonderful to have you here. Your near-death experience was so fascinating because your death could have been extremely gruesome, really horrible, but then it was very miraculous too, and how you were saved and how you came back. And it all started with a scarf. So why don't you take us back, tell us a little bit about your family history, and then take us to that day with the scarf.
Okay, be happy to. I'll be honest, it every time I recall the accident, it causes some trauma, and so I'm going to try. That's why I wrote it down in book format, because of that trauma. But I will be happy to briefly sum it up for everybody. Well, my family, I included that because when I was called to write, I was told along the lines of Angela's ashes. So I like to share about family because that was something I was told was my mission. And the importance of family, I'm sure everyone will regard in their own way. And also, I think when people are listening to you, they want to know who you are, where you're from, and what extraneous influences may have or have not influenced your experience. So my experience was my family immigrated from Germany, and they were survivors from the war with Nazi Germany at the time, and great family history there. Lots of survival, and I think that's basically what they brought me in my life, was survival, and strength was important, and endurance. So they immigrated. My father was an engineer. My grandfather was an engineer for Mercedes-Benz, and their top engineer with the Blue Mac. So they were all very engineer-minded, and I am as well, scientifically. When they came to this country after the war, they really didn't want to talk about spiritual things or anything out of the ordinary. They really wanted a normal, low-key, no attention drawn to them life. And middle of the road was what they were looking for, to be, peaceful. So here we were in America. Very excited to be in America and the firstborn American. And along came my grandparents, who also moved here when they retired, and they built a home together. And it was in a resort, like a very low-key resort in Pennsylvania. In that resort, they had a ski hill that was new that year, so it didn't have all the safety features. It was basically a tow pulley type rope, which I don't think they make anymore. And it was taken down after my incident. So I wore a scarf that morning. We were taking a hike, and I had this, I was 12, and I had this feeling come over me when I left the house to take my scarf off. And my mother kept insisting that I tie it and double knot it. And it was the strangest thing. I was pretty much an obedient child. I wasn't very vocal. I was more quiet. And I began to just panic. I wanted the scarf off. Little did I know later on that double knot would cause me to not be able to remove my scarf in any way. When we got to the ski hill, which we walked to, it was during a blizzard. There was no 911. It was in the 70s. There was no 911, no cell phones. And during the blizzard, we also had no snowplows in that community, because it was a summer vacation type of a community where people came just on off days. There was also no hospital nearby, no trauma, no police. It was all volunteer, fire department, police department. So we had our own volunteer security. When I went up the ski lift, my brother commented. He goes, "Wow, this isn't natural. Like, it was so strong it could rip through your gloves." So the fibers were also frayed. My scarf entangled at one point at the bottom of the hill, and it began to spirally twist, and I was hung the entire length of the lift. And I crashed into probably at least a dozen of the metal poles that carried the lift head on. So there was a little square cut out, and not to get too graphic, but there was no way out. And I knew I was either going to be beheaded or my neck would be broken, because, as we all know, a hanging has been used for execution and it's very effective. So I was doomed for either execution style or decapitation. And I did not have a belief system in place or anything like that. I didn't know. My family had roots in Lutheran, but it was more like keeping track of your births, because that's what they did, because all the records were burned during the war. So I found that I was Lutheran just recently, actually, all the way back through Ancestry. So I was hung and my neck broke, and I don't remember crashing into the booth. No one could stop it because there was no one in the booth. The man had left, so there was no one there to shut anything off. So that was the outcome. My family was the only family there, and they were at the bottom of the hill, and they all thought that they shouldn't come up because it would be too gruesome for my mother to see. And my grandfather, being an engineer, and my father and everyone, they had looked at the mechanics of it before we went on the lift. And so they knew that that was my fate. And they wanted to wait to get help. So I was on the top of the hill by myself for approximately, we tried to estimate it to 45 minutes. And here's the good part, Heather. So during that time when everyone thought I had this gruesome ending, I have had an entire lifetime of the most loving relationship and friendship and guidance and insights and hugs my whole life. And I thought everyone did, because I knew that everyone was loved and embraced the same way. And when I lived through it, and I would talk to people, I remember always feeling like, wow, people know this. And, I didn't know that it was different not to have this kind of experience. And now I'm finding out more and more that it's not. It's getting more and more common. So I was laying in the snow. I don't remember being in the snow as much as looking over to the woods. And, everyone talks about the light and go to the light. But it was more like there was a light. But it was more than a visual light. It was a light that contained more than sight. It contained information, and it contained it enveloped you. You learned from it. And you could feel it. It was an embrace, and it was extraordinary. Not so much colors. It was just in that light. I felt this knowledge of being safe, being loved, being cared for, that I was a precious individual, that I was important, that I was known. A total stranger was approaching me, and I felt completely known. My name, everything about me felt known. And I thought, wow, this is really, really so comforting. And I thought at first, is this my dad approaching? And because it looked like a male figure in the light, but it was very illuminating, but recognizable as almost a human figure of a male. And then there were two others later that I saw that were also figures with him, one taller and one smaller. And I thought it was my dad because it felt so loving and rescuing. And I guess when it came closer, I was just like elated. I was so happy. And the figure leaned in front of me and let me know who he was, and in not so many in words, but in that information with his light, you know exactly who it is. I did anyway. I knew exactly who that was without ever meeting or learning anything about him. I learned everything in that moment. And it was a father. So I knew it was a fatherly, parental, enormous, lovingly being, like just encompassing. Never in my lifetime have I forgotten that. It was nothing like comparable to a dream, because I was left with this memory that is not just a intellectual memory, it's a filling of your heart. And in my heart, the mind and heart connected, and so the memory is understood in my mind, but my heart is full of the love and information that it all carried. So it's a complete transference, mind and heart connection. It's an incredible, it's so ethereal. So anyway, he was kneeling next to me, and the two beside him were kind of making me giggle because they were like horsing around a little bit. And they were behind him, and I was kind of giggling because the taller one was saying to the shorter one, like, come on, time is of essence here. We got to get moving on this case. Like I was a case. And they're like, we got to get moving on her case. And then I was carried. I remember being lifted and carried, like underneath my body. I guess it came these arms, because I remember the hands that came towards me and lifted me. And the hands just were so, glowing and surrounded by this embracing light. And we were going home, I was told. We're going to go home. And I thought during the 70s, I thought, oh, great, we're going to go home and watch Mod Squad. And I was thinking of my favorite TV shows at 12 years old were Mod Squad and the FBI and Room 222. I remember thinking about those. I remember thinking about my dog. So I had an awareness of my earth, my life. And I hadn't, but I was so enjoying that love.
And who was the man that was there?
That was 100% Jesus Christ. 100%. I've never doubted that in my lifetime. Never, ever have I been moved off that knowing. It's 100%. And as I say it, I get this joy because I can feel in my heart that information, just being like there's such a gratitude. And he was such a gentleman. His love was never forced on me or had any expectations. It was always a real relationship of, I love you and I'm so glad if you love me back. Like just like a real love. And so as in any healthy relationship, there's no power struggle. It's a completely grateful and appreciative and kind and beautiful. It's beautiful and strong, very strong. Thank you for that strength. So Jesus let me know that that I was his and that I mattered. And, and I think about 9 billion people on the planet, and I think if they only could know that 9 billion is a small pebble in the ocean for him. I mean, he has room for many, many more, and he knows everyone. And we're so unique, and we're so privileged in being his child. And so those emotions were comforting, not emotions. Those weren't emotions. They were facts. They were just facts that went into my heart. Everything I see or read, you get a discernment later through it, because there's things I see or hear that are from him, and then I can kind of recognize when they're, because we create, and he let me know we create, and he enjoys what we create. So I always can kind of tell the difference. I'm like, no, man created disease, not God. Or why are children suffering with cancer and all these other things? And I think, well, we've kind of, ruined our foods and done a lot of things that affect our bodies, our human physical bodies, which were created to not go through all that. Anyway, does that answer the question, Heather? Because I can go on and on with all the...
It does. And from there, you went to heaven.
Yeah. So he carried me. And I remember being just more than happy to go with him and leave everything behind. I didn't think of it as leaving anything behind, because I had this knowing of it's never ending and we're all connected. Like, I didn't feel like I was leaving. I just felt like I was going home, and I just kind of knew I'd see everybody again. I didn't feel like I was saying goodbye to anyone. But then came a moment where I was in his arms, and there were like the two that were with him were surrounding him, and they were almost like, I don't know how else to describe it except kind of like wings or some kind of barrier that was almost protective, and they were like, they looked like they were almost like gladiators. It wasn't like a beautiful female angel. They looked more like warriors or something, but they were friendly and making me laugh. And so they took up this space that I couldn't see anything else around me. And I remember all the light, and then but I caught a glimpse of down below, and I saw my mom running around on the bottom of the hill and screaming. And in that moment, my heart just felt this like heated pain, and I could see my family at the bottom of the hill. And so that let me know later, looking back, that I must have been elevated a bit above the tree line, because the hill, there's no way you could see the bottom from the top.
And how did they know that you had been injured, or they thought killed?
They knew that the outcome from looking at the machinery, that there was no one in there to stop it.
They knew your scarf had gotten caught in it?
Yes. Everyone saw my scarf get caught. My brother was behind me, probably about 6 feet behind me. And the last breath I had, I remember screaming, "Let go," because I thought he's younger and I didn't want him to see. And I just remember that horrific scream and my brother's distress. And that whole part was probably will never go away. As far as the trauma, it causes a lot of me to be very empathetic with people who have trauma, because I understand the impact. But yeah, they knew. Oh, and my scarf, that was another. There's no way. There were all these gears, 2 huge gears, And my grandfather, the engineer, was at the bottom. And they told me later that my scarf came flying on the top rope perfectly straight, and it flew down. It didn't fly. It was on the rope and it came perfectly straight. No knot, nothing. And it came down, and they fell to their knees because they knew there was something so much greater than they could describe that had happened. So they knew that there was a miracle all around them. There was just this. And when they did finally come to the top of the hill, my mother, I remember her calling and saying, "Who are you talking to?" Because when I was returned, I was still speaking with Jesus. And my mom said, who is she talking with? And she heard there was conversation. And she just said it freaked her out. She would always say, "That freaks me out."
And obviously that scarf was tied around your neck in a double knot. It was twisted around the tow rope. It would have been impossible for you to be freed.
Impossible. It was so entangled in that rope, and then the double knot, which I could not get over my head, and it never would have made it over my head because the way the rope twisted, it was remarkable. And then it had to go through giant mechanical metal gears that would have demolished my scarf and and torn it to shreds. And it came out on top perfectly straight. And that was, for my engineering grandfather, more than he could ever have imagined to see. So that was a sign for them. And that was unforgettable.
And meanwhile, you're in heaven.
Meanwhile, I'm having the time of my life. And they're crying, and I'm having the time of my life where I'm experiencing a place that had no jealousy or no anger it was just this tremendous love and peace. And feeling known is an amazing feeling when someone knows what your heart feels or what your concerns are, what you worry about, what you're thinking, everything about you. It's amazing to have that. And actually, it was difficult for me to return after that, in the sense of I didn't realize throughout my life, my friendships, my relationships with family and loved ones was my expectations were just too high for people. They were just way too high, but I didn't understand that at a young age. So I was very often disappointed in outcomes or changes of heart, or it was very big adjustment later that I had to find my way through being, and I learned how, the patience that Christ has. So I just thought, well, practice patience. And that was a big practice for me with myself and everyone around me. And it's just been a big growth piece. But yeah, I was in heaven.
And you wanted to come back because you saw the distress with your mother, but it wasn't so easy to just send you back.
Right. So I felt this great personal wanting to stay, but there was just something that I didn't think my mom would survive. And I remember bringing that up somehow, whether it's telepathically or verbally, but I remember almost being overly I kept bringing it up, and I was like, well, Ken, look at her. She's never going to make it. What are we going to do, and how? And the concerns were, and I was calmed with them, but I remember just not wanting to stop bringing it up. And I became a bit of I don't want to say a problem, but yeah, it wasn't, I felt like this wasn't in the cards. It wasn't planned, and they weren't expecting that, or were they? I don't know, but it was my personal wish. And so during that time, and I know that it's a perfect system, and I know it's got lots of wisdom that, you know, it's just beyond. And that's a great name of your show, is Beyond. It really is beyond.
Thank you.
The wisdoms are just so connected. And I thought, I just knew they were going to do what was right for everyone. And I learned that because they showed me a glimpse of their system. And it was enough to let me know that this is an enormous system that's, everything is recorded, and everything mattered, and everything was known. And so there's no other outcome except what's best for us. And I also felt listened to and heard. I wasn't ignored. I didn't feel dismissed. I didn't feel like I was, but they let me know and see part of their system.
And when you say they, at this point, we're not just talking about Jesus and a couple of
Right.
angels. There was a
Right.
large council there.
Yeah, and I didn't know exactly. I did not know at my age what a council was. I mean, I knew gathering, but I did notice that they were, I guess, in their uniform, but it wasn't a uniform. It was just these similar colors of, and later on, I'm like, how do I describe them? But just like a cloak. And I noticed they didn't really walk. They did more of this like gliding, but it was low over the ground, but it was swift. And it felt very much like they were coming to meet, like a meeting of the minds, or a meeting of the, and they had, I thought they would come to I knew they were talking about me because, I was with Jesus and he was letting me know, and I knew he was in charge of it all, but he was also trying to give me an understanding of, this is how much you matter. There are so many things in place. There's such a large system that nothing's overlooked. And that was a big takeaway for me. Yeah. And they gathered, and then, at some point, I can only guess, because I really know that I'm not qualified to know everything that they do. But I knew that there was a sense of limit to what they were going to be able to do. And so this other gathering came. And so I knew then from the takeaway that there was a hierarchy of like it very much like in corporations. If you've got to keep climbing up to the top. So they were the initial group, and then came another group, and that group, at some points they were asking me questions like, "Are you sure? Do you really want to go? Do you really want to go back? There's going to be a lot of pain." There was like a lot of very thoughtful, but they just were addressing it all to kind of make sure I understood that. And when I think about going back with pain, I realize now they meant, are you going to go, that there's just pain for everyone here. Everyone will have difficulties, and there weren't. So I thought, and I didn't know that then, but I understand it now. They really weren't saying that I would be hurting physically. And I always used to think that, but I realize it was more of everyone hurts here, so you don't get a free ride without.
Makes sense.
Right. And so they were practical. And and as I was contemplating or listening and just trying to absorb it all, I saw so many things, but I also met another being, and they woke him, and it was really interesting because he was not, and he reminded me kind of like a mountain, because he was like over this mountain, and almost as large as it in character. And it's just this large character, and they didn't want to wake him. And it was like, oh, who's going to do it? So the second council was like, I guess we're going to have to, because we don't know what to do. Because they kept checking back with me if I wanted to stay. And I kept saying no, if it's okay, and they were like, well, so then, and Jesus was always with me, and that it's a presence that is always by your side. So I felt safe to say no. And he was just so comforting, and he was patient with, and then this grouchy man, older man. And I remember I didn't get a lot of clear visuals, but that I did. And he almost was like, remember this, 'cause I woke up for you. And he goes, study my face. And he didn't give me a name or anything. I didn't really know. And I looked at his face, and I thought, why do I have to? And he kept showing it to the side and forward. And he's like, look at it. I thought, okay. And then he kind of glided. It was like a moving presence. He seemed to glide me around, and he showed me, all the housings of information. Like I didn't really know what a university was or anything like that, but it seemed to me like he let me know there were records, like there was films and document. It was just like that. I didn't see an actual film or document, but he was saying, like, letting me know, listen, everything here is 100% known. Like, you're going to be fine. Like everything, like we're really smart. He was saying, we are really, really smart, and every one of your family is going to be okay.
One thing that surprises me is that he was sleeping, because I don't think of heaven, somebody sleeping. And then also I think of perfection in heaven. So when you say he was a little grumpy, that surprises me.
Yeah. And for me, it felt grumpy because he seemed really like he was trying to convey wisdom, and he was trying to convey, he wasn't mean or grouchy like that, but he was letting me know he had a very specific, like pay attention, like he wanted focus.
He was serious.
He was serious. That's a better word than grumpy, but at 12 it felt grumpy, but he was very serious. And I tried to put this all together and soak it all in, and I did at the time, and he just provided so much knowledge, and he kept saying, he would let me know that this knowledge is something you can know when not him personally, but when heaven wants you to know. So it's there, and you'll know when you're supposed to know. And but I knew that it was all safe, and it was just, I I look now as an adult, I would look at like councils and things and courtrooms, and I would see all the discord and I thought, they don't have that there. It's a well-run machine, and it's perfect. It's perfect. And he was perfect. And when I say sleeping, it felt to me like when I worked later as an adult, when you have to go to your supervisor, you'll hem and haw before you have to, like when I worked as a registered nurse. So before I phoned a physician or I called in a team of any other discipline, you would look to make sure that you did everything you could before you went to that next step. And I think it was more of a courtesy. You didn't want to have them do the extra work if you could do it. So I knew he had a very specific job. And I didn't think he wanted to be called upon unless, I understood he was very specific. So his job was extremely focused. And that was to let me know. And I'm sure there's lots of other reasons I won't find out till I go back, but there was lots of information, and I still get it more and more and more and more in life. When I need it, it will just come in, and I'll know it's not from me, that they're giving it to you when you need it. And I think that happens to everyone, whether they are aware or not. But sometimes you're like, did I just say that? How did I know that? And you just move on, but it's all that incoming. Sadly, a lot of times, I just said this the other day, when we're too caught up, which I'm not immune to either, but when we're too caught up in the negatives or the misfortunes, we're not always able to hear the good news, and we're not always able to hear the solutions, and we're not always able to see our miracles or blessings that are really right there, that are huge, but we're kind of stuck in I'm still upset about this. And sometimes I find myself stopping, thanks to that experience and that focus. I'll stop and say, wait a minute, I'm missing what I'm really supposed to be focusing on because I'm doing my own worrying.
That is such great advice, because I do that. I think we all do that.
I do it too. And thanks to that being, I learned, I'll sit there and I have to really remember it, and I'll go, oh, I spent too much time on this. And then I'll think, let me look, like, say my husband lost his job, or this happened or that happened. And you know how it just piles, and then you're sad for this person or that person. And then I'll sit I remember just the other day sitting in the car thinking, wait a minute, I might be missing something really great because I'm focusing on the sadness around all these situations. And I'm still sad about them, but then if I can shift, and then I go, wait a minute, but I'm healthy today. Wait a minute. Do you realize all the good things that happened last week? And the miracles and the good news can be easily overlooked. And he, in his seriousness, I don't want to say he gets irritated by it, but he's kind of like, wake up. They try to wake you up and hope you realize. So it takes a conscious effort for me to do, but it's practice, and it's hard because I also think it's important to be in the moment and recognize the moment. And if it's not a good moment, that's okay. But yeah, they taught me to snap out of it at some point and look around.
And now you're teaching all of us that. So that's great. Sue, I have so much more I want to talk to you about. I know you spent a lot of time with Jesus, so let's take that into part 2.
Perfect.
Thanks so much for joining me on Beyond with Heather Tesch. That was part 1. Make sure to listen to part 2. And if you liked what you heard, please hit the thumbs up button and subscribe for more episodes.